An economy of words. The WBBM Noon Business Hour continues.
Well, the shape-shifting media industry is shifting shape once again. Let's talk about big moves by T-Mobile and Disney with Tim Hanlon, the managing director of the Vertere Group here in Chicago. Tim, welcome back to the program. You could devote an entire hour to who gets what in the Disney 21st Century Fox deal that was announced today for $52 billion. What are we going to notice as consumers as this deal lurches towards reality?
An hour. I'm ready to go to midnight. Plenty of stuff here to unpack.
You could talk about The Simpsons. You could talk about regional sports networks. You could talk about streaming. I mean, there's so many angles here.
You got it. So let's think about it domestically to start, right? So there's a lot of international components to it too, but for the domestic audience in Chicago, of course, a couple of things. One certainly is ESPN. ESPN obviously has been a challenge for Disney over the last number of years as people have cut the cord to their cable subscriptions and sports rights have gotten increasingly out of control. One of the key elements of this deal is what they call regional sports networks, that which the Fox company owns quite a few of, not necessarily here in Chicago, but a lot of other areas around the country. The idea of being able to tie ESPN's impressive portfolio of national sports programming and the regional presentation of those games and leagues is a very, very crown jewel in this. A second one is Hulu. Hulu, as you may know or remember, is jointly owned by a lot of different media companies. And by this deal, Disney will actually now control the ownership, not a majority ownership now, of Hulu, and use that as a big component of how they build out what they have signaled to the marketplace is their own direct-to-consumer streaming offerings a la Netflix. And last but not least, and there are clearly some other things here, but this week is really interesting because the new Star Wars movie launches, and this is actually sort of a hidden jewel here, is the unification of the ownership completely of the Star Wars franchise. Yes, Disney bought Lucasfilms and all of that, but the distribution rights for the Star Wars films is still under the Fox Studios ownership. This will actually combine those things and make them all completely owned and controlled by Disney.
And so this also, and talking about just some of the intellectual property, you mentioned how Star Wars will be changing hands. This also means that The Simpsons will one day become part of the Disney universe. So does this mean we will actually, truly one day see an Itchy and Scratchy Land theme park?
That's to the delight of my 11-year-old daughter, who is fascinated with The Simpsons and watches those shows endlessly. You also probably remember too, or maybe not, there is an episode where actually The Simpsons presaged this acquisition that Fox would be ultimately owned by Disney Company. So there's something going on there that synergistically might have been in the works for a long time earlier.
Well, with the latest media news a bit today, T-Mobile is launching a TV service next year. Tell us about that.
Something completely different, Chris, yet actually related in the grand scheme of things, right? So T-Mobile, obviously one of the big wireless firms in the U.S. and a fledgling challenger cable operator called Layer 3, which is available in Chicago, of course, in Los Angeles, a couple other markets. This is a bolder and will be more defined in the months to come when they announce details, move to conjoin a challenger and a feisty challenger in the mobile wireless space with an outlier from the cable television world to perhaps create a more unbundled and more wireless-friendly distribution environment for television and video.
Well, thanks for explaining all of these things to us because they're coming real fast these days. Tim Hanlon is managing director at the Vertere Group here in Chicago.